The lake house was already old when I was a child, and it has not improved with sitting empty. My grandmother left it to my mother. My mother left it to me and my brother in equal shares. And my brother, being sensible in a way I've never quite managed, has not visited it once since the will cleared probate. So it falls to me to drive up every spring and fall, walk the dock, write down what the winter has done to the screen porch, and pretend I am keeping the place alive. Last September, I drove up on a Tuesday afternoon, opened the back door, and smelled the same smell I have been smelling since I was 4. Cedar, lake water, and the particular dust of a building that wants to be open and is shut. The light was the gold going gray it gets when summer is finishing in a hurry. I unloaded the car. I made the bed. I put my dive gear on the screen porch where the air would dry it. None of that is the part I want to remember. I'm just trying to start at the beginning. I'm 30 years old. I learned to dive in the warm, clear water of a quarry in Ontario when I was 22, and I've been certified for cold water diving for about 6 years. The lake, I'd rather not say which lake, has a long, deep cleft along the eastern shore where the bottom drops to about 90 feet. As a teenager, I thought the drop-off was a kind of doorway. As an adult, with proper equipment, I learned that it is more like a long staircase of basalt slabs, each one furred with freshwater sponges, falling in clean shelves into water that is colder than you are prepared for. I dive there alone, which I know I shouldn't, and I always tell my brother where I'll be and when I'll be back, and I always come back. And once when I didn't text him on time, he drove 3 hours and 10 minutes to the house to see if I was alive. So we have a system. That September, I had 4 full days planned and a list of small things to attend to in between. The dock had a loose plank. The water heater was making a sound I didn't like. The neighbors 2 coves over wanted to know if our boathouse roof had survived the August storms. None of that is the story either. The story is that on the second evening, around 6 in the evening with the sun still warm and the water already going cold, I went down off the end of the dock with a scooter battery I wanted to test and a mesh bag of nothing in particular, and I met the fish. That is not how it felt at the time. At the time, it was an ordinary thing. I was at about 32 feet, hovering off a sponge shelf, watching my own bubbles climb. A whitefish drifted up out of the gloom and held station about 6 feet from my mask. Whitefish do this sometimes. They are calm and slow and not particularly afraid of divers. I admired it for a while. Whitefish are an underrated animal, I think. They look like they were drawn by someone who had only heard fish described and was trying to hit a calm average. Their scales are very large and clean. Their eyes are dark and round. This one was about 18 inches, which is on the bigger side for our lake, and otherwise unremarkable. I went back up at the end of my dive. I had a glass of wine on the porch. I texted my brother. I went to bed. I thought about the fish twice the next morning, which is 1.5 times more than I usually think about a fish. I caught myself remembering its eye. I had been holding very still in the water, the way you do when you don't want to startle something, and the fish had not been holding still. It had been adjusting. Whitefish drift with the current. This one had been correcting against it. Its tail had moved in a way that wasn't reflexive. It had held its eye on me, and behind the eye there had been, and this is the part I don't know how to say cleanly, there had been someone home. You learn, if you spend enough time underwater, what an animal's attention feels like. A bass watches you, and that's a calculation of threat. A pike watches you, and that's the same calculation, performed faster. A turtle watches you, and you can almost feel the tiny old machinery clicking behind its head, trying to decide what kind of object you are. None of those gazes have weight. The fish in front of me had weight. I told myself, in the kitchen, with the kettle on, that this was the kind of thing 30-year-olds invent because their lives are too quiet. I told myself I had been at depth for 40 minutes, and the cold and the nitrogen had rendered me sentimental about a whitefish. I went down again that evening. I told myself I was checking the sponge shelf for damage from a fishing line I had seen tangled in a rock the year before. That was a lie. I went down to look for the fish, and I found it, and that was the night I started keeping track. It was at the same depth, off the same shelf. It came toward me from the deeper side, in the black behind the second drop, and arrived at the same 6-foot distance and held station. I extended one arm very slowly. I curled my fingers, one at a time, in a slow wave. The fish watched my hand. When I had finished waving, the fish moved up about 12 inches in the water column and held there. Then it moved back down 12 inches. Then it held the original position. It did not look at the rest of me. It looked at my hand. This was on dive number 2, which is to say I am compressing things a little for the telling. That night, I came up and convinced myself again that I had imagined it. I told myself fish have curious behaviors. I told myself I was projecting. I made a salad. I read 3 chapters of a novel about a couple buying a house in Tuscany. I went to sleep and dreamed about my mother, which I do here. The third dive, I brought a small slate and a pencil, the kind we use to write notes underwater. I drew a circle on the slate. I held it up. The fish considered the slate for what felt like a long time and was probably 8 or 9 seconds. Then it moved across the slate left to right, slowly, at a constant speed. It came back to the starting position. It moved across the slate left to right again. The second pass was at exactly the same speed, as far as I could tell. It came back. It held position. I went up. I sat on the end of the dock with my fins still on, and did not take my mask off for several minutes, because I was afraid that if I took my mask off, I would have to acknowledge what was happening above water in the rest of my life, which was nothing. I was on a thin patch of leave from a job I disliked. I hadn't seen anyone I'd describe as a friend in 11 weeks. My last relationship had ended in a clean, kind way that was somehow more lonely than a bad one. I did not want my whole life to fit through the lens of a fish. But I went down again the next evening with a different plan. I took a tank banger, which is a piece of metal on an elastic that you flick against the cylinder on your back to make a sound. Underwater, sound carries strangely. A tap on a tank is a sharp, clean ping that fills the whole nearby water column. I had read a paper once about whitefish hearing. They have a connection between their swim bladder and their inner ear, which means they hear better than most freshwater fish. I tapped once. Pause. Tapped twice. Pause. Tapped 3 times. Pause. I waited. The fish, which had arrived at its station before I'd taken the banger out of the pocket of my BCD, did nothing for a while. Then it moved. It moved up once and held. It moved up 2 short increments and held. It moved up 3 short increments and held. Then it descended back to the original position and waited. I didn't sleep that night, or I slept badly, which is the same thing. I lay in the upstairs bedroom with the window open and listened to the loons on the far side of the lake doing the thing loons do, which is to call to each other in a key designed to make a person feel that the world is older than they are. I thought about ravens, which can count. I thought about octopuses, which can solve puzzles and dream and recognize individual humans. I thought about cleaner wrasses, which can pass mirror tests under certain conditions. I thought about all the times I had read a science article about animal cognition and felt a clean intellectual satisfaction at the news that the world was more full than we'd thought. And I realized that none of that satisfaction had prepared me for the specific shape of this. Because the cleaner wrasse and the raven and the octopus are remote, and the whitefish was 32 feet below my dock, I started keeping a notebook. I am not generally a notebook person. I bought a small waterproof one at the hardware store in town the next morning, on the same trip where I bought new washers for the kitchen sink and a bag of birdseed for my brother's idea of a bird feeder he installed 2 summers ago and has not since refilled. The cashier at the hardware store asked if I was up at the family place. The cashier was a woman about my age whose family had owned the bait shop for 3 generations and who I sort of remembered from summers as a kid. I said I was. She said it was nice that someone was still keeping it open. I bought a stick of cinnamon gum I didn't want, just to seem normal. That afternoon, I made a list. I wrote, "It tracks attention to a localized object, not the whole diver." I wrote, "It understands repeated sequences and reproduces them in a changed register, taps becoming vertical motion." I wrote, "It returns to the same station between events as if maintaining a position rather than feeding." I underlined the word maintaining. Then I did the experiment that I think of now as the one that broke me open. I took down 2 small dive markers, those little weighted pads we use to mark spots on the bottom, and I placed them about 10 feet apart on the sponge shelf. They were red and yellow. I retreated to my hover position and waited. The fish came up from below at the usual time. It went to the red marker first. It held over the red marker for what I would call a long time. Then it moved to the yellow marker. Then it returned to the red marker. Then it returned to its original station and held. I moved the markers. I switched their positions so the red was where the yellow had been. I retreated. The fish came up again. It went to the new red position, the position where the red marker now was, not where the red marker had been the first time. It hovered. Then it went to yellow. Then it returned to red. Then it returned to its original station. I almost surfaced too fast. My mind ran ahead of my body, which is a bad way to be in cold water. I made myself breathe 4 slow cycles, and then I did the safety stop. And then I came up the line carefully. And only when I was sitting on the dock with my regulator out did I let myself laugh. In that breathless way you laugh when something has happened to you that nobody you can call would understand. It was tracking the color, not the position. It had a category for red. I think of the next 2 weeks now as the conversation. That's a generous word for what we did. We worked out a small grammar of taps and shapes and motions. The fish learned my pace, and I tried to learn its pace, which was much, much slower than mine. If I was patient, if I held still in the water and breathed slowly and did not try to push, it would do remarkable things. If I rushed, even a little, it would slip back below the second drop and not return that night. I learned to think of it as a person, which is the wrong word and also the only word. It had preferences. It liked certain shapes more than others. It would consider a triangle and dismiss a square. It tracked the direction of my bubbles with a focus that I, even as a diver, found uncanny. Bubbles are usually a thing a fish ignores or runs from. This fish watched my bubbles the way a person watches a pot of boiling water, like the bubbles were a process whose timing it needed to learn. After a few dives, I realized why. It was timing my breath. It was learning the rhythm of when I would inhale and when I would not. And on the dives where I tried to test this, by holding my exhalation a beat longer than usual, the fish would move its body very slightly, like a metronome adjusting to a singer who was dragging the beat. It was patient with me. That's the thing. It was incredibly patient. I want to be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying the fish spoke English. I am not saying I heard a voice in my head. I'm not saying anything you would have to call telepathy if you wanted to write it down later for a magazine. The communication was always physical, slow, and through the medium of objects we could both see. What I will say is that, by the end of the first week, I had what felt unmistakably like a sense of its disposition. It was calm. It was not afraid of me. It was not, I came to understand, afraid of anything. It was thinking about something larger than itself, all the time, and our small games were a side activity it tolerated, because it had decided, for reasons of its own, to be tolerant of me. I started taking down photographs. Not photographs of the fish. The fish would not allow itself to be photographed in any way I could later use. I tried twice, and on each of those dives the fish did not appear. It knew. I cannot say how it knew, but it knew. After the second time, I left the camera on the dock and apologized to the water, which is a thing I would have laughed at someone else for doing. The fish came back the next evening and held station, and we resumed the work. The photographs I took down were prints. I had a folder of family pictures from the boathouse that I'd been meaning to organize, and one afternoon, in a moment of something between curiosity and embarrassment, I sealed a few prints in a clear waterproof slate and brought them down. I wanted to know what the fish would do with a picture of a thing. It looked at a picture of my mother for a long time. It looked at a picture of the dock from above, in summer light, for a long time. It looked at a picture of a sailboat, which had been taken at the regatta 2 years before I was born, and at the sailboat picture, it did something I had not seen it do before. It moved closer, closer than it had ever come to me. It hovered no more than 18 inches from the slate. Then it moved its body in a slow horizontal sweep, left to right, and back twice, the way you might pass your hand over a name on a wall. I changed the picture. I put up a picture of the lake from the air, a postcard image my grandmother had kept in a drawer. The fish looked at the lake. It moved up and down twice, slowly, and I am describing exactly what I saw, though I admit I'm not sure what to make of it. It went perfectly still. Not holding station still. Still in a way that animals are generally not. Its gills barely moved. It held there for what my dive computer later told me was 41 seconds. Then it resumed its station, and our session ended for the night. That was the night the wind came up wrong. I should explain. There is a sailing channel that cuts past the point about 1.5 miles from the house, and pleasure boats use it in summer to reach the upper lake. 2 weeks before I'd arrived, a sailboat had lost its rigging there in calm weather. The mast had come down. No one had been hurt. I want to be clear about that. The sailors had been thrown into the water, but had been wearing PFDs and had been picked up by another boat within a quarter of an hour. But the incident had been strange enough to make the local paper. The forestay had snapped, and then in a freakish unison, the backstay had snapped, and the mast had folded into the water in conditions that, the sailing club commodore had said, should not have produced any stress on a rig at all. The article had used the word anomalous. I had read it on my phone at a gas station on the drive up and forgotten about it. I remembered it that night, sitting on the porch in a sweater, listening to the wind that had not been forecast pushing the surface of the lake in a direction the lake didn't usually go. I thought about the way the fish had looked at the sailboat picture. I tried to laugh at myself and did not quite manage. The next dive, I brought a printout of the news article. I sealed it in the slate and brought it down. The fish came up. It held. I held the article up. The fish looked at the article. It looked at the article for a long time. Then it did the slow horizontal pass again, twice, the way it had done with my mother and the dock and the sailboat photograph. Then it held station and waited. I am not a person who jumps to conclusions. I should say that. I am cautious by training, cautious by temperament. I worked in environmental compliance, which is a job that mostly consists of telling other people they cannot conclude what they would like to conclude based on the data they have. I would have rejected, professionally, the inference I made next if anyone had brought it to my desk on a Friday afternoon. But I made it anyway. I went up. I made tea. I sat with the laptop in the kitchen and I looked up, and my hands moved strangely while I was doing it, like they were doing the searching on my behalf, every odd thing that had happened on the lake in the last 2 summers. I expected to find a few. The lake is a quiet place. There aren't many. I found 3. The sailboat in the channel. The simultaneous dock failure of 3 lake houses on the western shore the previous July, which I had heard about at the time and forgotten. 3 docks on 3 different properties with 3 different builders and 3 different ages of construction had failed within 40 minutes of each other on a calm afternoon with no boat traffic to speak of. And the GPS dead zone near the point, which had been a running joke at the sailing club for about 8 months. Pleasure boats had been losing GPS signal in a roughly consistent area near the point, and one had run aground there in the spring. No one had been hurt. The Marine Survey people had been out twice and could not find a cause. I would like to be able to say I did not believe my own conclusion. I would like to be able to say I was rational. The truth is that I sat in the kitchen with the tea going cold, and I felt very calm in a way that I now understand to be a kind of shock. The conclusion, once formed, was not loud. It was as quiet as the fish. I went down the next evening with the printouts of all 3 incidents. I held them up one by one. The fish looked at each one in turn. It did the slow horizontal pass over each one twice. When I had run out of incidents, it held station and waited. It was, I thought, and I'm not making a claim about consciousness here, only about how it felt to me in that water, in that cold, with my own breath going in and out of the regulator. It was waiting for me to ask another question. And so I tried. I had the slate. I drew a question mark, the only piece of punctuation I was reasonably sure was not specific to a language. I held it up. I waited. The fish moved across the question mark, left to right, very slowly. Then it moved upward through the water column, perhaps 8 feet above its usual station, which was higher than I had ever seen it go. It held there. Then it descended and resumed its station. It seemed to me to be saying, "There is more, and it is bigger than you can see from where you are standing." I did not push. We had a few more sessions, which I will not describe in detail because they are mine, and because they are not what anyone would call dramatic. They were quiet. They were patient. I came to understand, slowly, what the fish was doing, or what I believed the fish was doing, which is the most honest way I know to put it. I came to understand that it did not act alone. I came to understand that it was part of, or in contact with, or aware of others, something distributed, something old, something that had decided, in a slow consensus across waters I will never see, that the time had come to begin a careful, gentle pushback against a species that had been very hard on the seas and the lakes and the fish in them for a very long time. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, a snapped rigging on a calm day, a dock that gave way before it should have, a pleasure boat that lost its bearings near a point. The kind of small, deniable, costless to them events that, summed across the world, would over time begin to make us cautious in a way we have not yet learned to be cautious. The fish was articulate about this. The fish was not angry. That is the part I find hardest to explain. Anger is fast, and the fish was slow. The fish was, and I think this is the right word, even though it sounds absurd, the fish was patient with us. It had decided the work would take a long time. It had decided that no one would be hurt if it could help it. It had decided that the way to teach a species without language was to make the world a slightly more inconvenient place, in small and specific ways, in places where the lesson would land. It also told me in its slow way that it could not be stopped. I asked. I did not ask in words. I asked by drawing a hand on the slate, palm out, the universal gesture for wait. The fish considered the hand and did the slow horizontal pass twice, and then descended below the second drop and did not come back that evening. The next evening, when it returned, it permitted me to be present, but it did not respond to the hand again. I understood I had asked something that was not mine to ask. I tried, for about 3 days, to tell people. I told my brother first. I called him from the porch with a glass of wine in my hand because I thought the wine would make me sound less serious and therefore more bearable. I told him about the fish. I told him about the experiments. I told him about the markers and the photographs and the sailboat. He listened the whole way through, which is a thing my brother does. He is a generous listener. And when I was done, he asked me, very gently, when I had last had a full meal. I told him I was eating. He asked when I was coming home. I said I had 3 more days. He said he was going to drive up. I told him not to. He said he was going to drive up anyway. He did. He stayed for 2 days. He did not dive with me. My brother does not dive. He sat on the porch and read a thriller and asked me, every few hours, if I wanted to take a walk into town. I went on 1 walk with him. The fish did not appear during that visit, which I understood without resentment. My brother left, gentle and worried, and I stood on the dock and watched him drive away. I told the woman at the bait shop, in a sideways way, by asking her if anyone had ever told her something strange about whitefish. She thought I meant fishing stories, and gave me a long, generous account of an uncle who had once caught a whitefish with a wedding ring in its stomach, which is a story I think she had been waiting years to tell someone. I laughed in the right places. I bought another stick of cinnamon gum. I told the Commodore of the sailing club, when I ran into her at the marina, about the dead zone. I did not mention the fish. I asked if anyone had ever, in jest or otherwise, suggested the dead zone might be deliberate. She laughed. She said the Marine Survey people had wondered if there was a magnetic anomaly under the lake, which was apparently a real thing that happened in northern lakes. She said her own theory was old mining equipment. I said her theory sounded sensible. I bought a coffee. I called my mother, who has been gone for 4 years, in the way that I sometimes call my mother. I sat on the dock and talked out loud, and I told her about the fish, because I knew she would not interrupt. The lake listened. The lake is a good listener. On my last evening, I went down for what I knew would be the last dive of the trip. The fish came up at the usual time. I had brought no slate. I had brought no markers. I held my hand out, palm up, and curled my fingers in the slow wave I had used on the second night. The fish moved up 12 inches and back. It held. I held. We were there for a long time. I would like to say that I felt afraid. I would like to say that I felt awe. The truth is that I felt understood in a way I do not usually feel understood by a being that was not built to understand me, and that this was the loneliest experience of my life. The fish was kind. The fish was patient. The fish had work to do. The fish was, in some way I could not articulate then, and can only barely articulate now, telling me goodbye for the season. Because the lake was about to close in on itself, and the work would slow, and we would not see each other again until spring. I went up. I broke down my gear. I drove home the next morning. In the months since, the news has had 2 more small items from that lake. A small private dock failure in early spring on a calm day, no one hurt. A research vessel from the State Department of Natural Resources lost its sonar in the same dead zone for 40 minutes in late April. The vessel was running a survey for invasive species. It had to suspend its work. A short article said the cause was undetermined. I did not go up at the usual time this spring. I have not been able to bring myself to. I will go in the fall. I will go because the house needs me, and because I think the fish has been waiting, and because I do not believe I am allowed to refuse the appointment. I do not know what we will say to each other this time. I do not know whether, after a winter, I will find the fish at the same shelf at the same depth, or whether I will find another fish, or whether I will find nothing at all, which is a possibility I have been trying to make my peace with. What I know is this: there are intelligences in the world that we have not been looking for because we have been looking with the wrong shape of expectation. There is more than one kind of mind, and not all of them are loud, and not all of them are housed in the species we have decided to take seriously. Some of them are very calm. Some of them are very old. Some of them have been watching us for a very long time and have decided, in their patient way, to begin a slow conversation we have not yet realized is being had. The rain has not stopped. The lake will be cold tonight. Somewhere, on a drop-off 32 feet below the dock my grandmother built, a silver-sided whitefish is holding station against a current that, at this time of year, runs toward the point, and it is, I believe, thinking about something. I do not know what. I am not sure I am supposed to. I am only sure that when I close my eyes and listen to the rain, I can almost feel the slow, deliberate pulse of an attention that is not human, and is not malicious, and is not, by any measure I have, in a hurry. And I find, more nights than not, that I am grateful for the company.